If you're not worried about NFTs in gaming, you should be. If you are worried about NFTs in gaming, you should be even more, because chances are you've been concerned about the wrong things. More microtransactions and excessive monetization sucks, but that is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the horrifying implications the widespread adoption of NFTs in gaming present. Even if you never buy an NFT in your entire life, you will still be negatively affected by their implementation. They have the potential to reshape the concept of gaming down to its very core, even fundamentally altering how games are designed. Okay, NFTs as they are right now suck. They're bad for the environment, art is being stolen, and I'm being a little too generous if I say only 95% of them are scams. We've all seen a think piece, YouTube video, or Reddit post by now, so I'm not gonna waste your time by going over all the same stuff. Yeah, you heard me correctly. I just said fuck the environment. The real problem is how this affects video games. But there is a reason why I want to talk about video games. A lot of problems the gaming industry has from both the consumer and corporate side can potentially be solved by NFT integration. Yeah, I did say consumer, but please don't mistake me for a true believer. Proponents of blockchain gaming have made some pretty grandiose statements about how the technology can solve some of the biggest consumer level problems we're currently facing, but there is a catch. Ultimately, NFTs and blockchains are just tools. Like money, NFTs are more or less morally neutral. You can use money to donate to a reputable charity or lobby the federal government to prevent corporate tax increases that would help us combat climate change. Yeah, we're doomed. And here lies the problem with NFTs in gaming. The vast majority of blockchain game companies don't really care about empowering the consumer. And the AAA gaming industry, who desperately wants to use NFTs, definitely don't care about empowering the consumer. Despite the language often used by the former, both these groups are essentially made up of the same type of people and have a common goal. To the uninformed eye, it appears like these things might actually be good for the average gamer, and that's why I believe these claims are worth further examination. Taking these proposals and bringing them to their logical endpoints in an effort to see exactly who would benefit from play-to-earn games and NFTs. NFTs and true digital ownership. Also, what the fuck is an NFT? Okay, kids, we gotta get some definitions out of the way for the rest of this video to make sense. If you don't need an explanation of what an NFT is, skip here. NFT stands for non-fungible token. The term fungible refers to a commodity's uniqueness. A dollar bill is fungible because it is completely interchangeable. A dollar's value is the same regardless of condition, age, or who owned the dollar before you. A non-fungible commodity would be something like a Pokemon card. This base set Charizard isn't necessarily equal to this base set Charizard because the differences between print runs and condition makes each base set Charizard have a strictly unique value. Stay with me, guys. I promise this video gets fun later on. A token, in this case, is a unit of data that exists on a blockchain. Basically what Bitcoin is. But while Bitcoin is fungible, NFTs are not, because they've been designed to contain a larger amount of data. Meaning, an NFT can store, say, a stupid ape drawing. The value of the NFT isn't based on its value as currency, but the digital asset the NFT represents. If a Bitcoin is $1, then an NFT is $1 that Beeple drew on. Beeple's dollar is now worth more, not as currency, but because of the art that's placed on it. And because the blockchain where an NFT is stored is decentralized, meaning it isn't directly tied to any one company's infrastructure, you don't have to worry about, say, Nintendo shutting down the Wii U and 3DS eShop and losing access to all your games. In theory. As I'm sure the crypto bros that will inevitably flood my comment section will point out, this is an extremely simplified explanation. But for our purposes as lay people, it'll suffice. And don't worry if you're still confused. That's kind of the point. Just keep this in mind. NFTs are meant to solve for the problem of digital ownership, a means for consumers to have quote-unquote true ownership over their digital purchases, as opposed to what really amounts to a dubious agreement between consumer and company that this digital item will remain accessible indefinitely. When it comes to gaming, NFTs have a particular implementation that is inherently stronger than their popular use right now as digital art assets. See, because we have this thing called, right-clicking, an art NFT isn't really as non-fungible as proponents claim. Yeah, your stupid ape may be in the strictest sense the real one, but the one I right-clicked can serve all the same purposes that yours does. There is no authentication process that allows the owner of a Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT to exclusively use the image. This is why I, and many others, believe the NFT art market will eventually crash. Contrast that with video games. You want to know if your Fortnite Carlton Dance Emote NFT— oh, sorry, I just threw up in my mouth a little. You want to know if your Fortnite Carlton Dance Emote NFT is the real deal? Well, plug it into the game and see if it works. The concept of an NFT is also alluring within the context of a gaming industry that is on the precipice of abandoning physical media altogether. Because digital marketplaces like Steam or Nintendo's eShop exists on each respective company's servers, your access to your digital purchases is dependent on those servers remaining active. And those servers definitely don't stay active indefinitely. The core problem with digital marketplaces is that they only exist if a company is willing to keep their servers up. At some point, the cost of maintaining a server will be greater than the money it's taking in, and it'll be shut down. Game preservation and consumer-friendly behavior be damned. Profit margins are the arbiter of corporate decision-making. If a video game were an NFT, it would functionally solve for this problem, allowing the consumer to have access to their digital purchases regardless of the status of a marketplace's server. The only problem is, NFTs don't actually exist outside a company's server. And even if they did, it doesn't matter. Storing data directly on the blockchain is really expensive. Like, stupid expensive. As a result, the vast majority of NFTs solve for this problem by simply storing code that points to a URL that contains whatever the actual digital asset is. And where are those assets stored? On a server independent of the blockchain. Guys, did no one think about this? That was literally the exact problem we were trying to solve. All an NFT stores is metadata pointing toward the digital asset, which, by the way, could easily be changed by the companies selling the NFT. NFTs in their current form will not solve for the problem of digital video game ownership because these games will still be stored on Nintendo, EA, or Ubisoft servers. It's the same problem we have now. But what if it wasn't? There are several alternatives being worked on to solve this problem. For the sake of argument, let's say we are in that world. All the issues of NFT storage have been solved, and you can truly own your digital video game on a decentralized blockchain independent of any gaming marketplace's servers. Well, would gaming companies let that happen?
As if we needed more reasons, we have another one to hate DRM on games.
Oh, nice.
DRM, aka digital rights management, aka the thing gaming companies implement on their digital platforms to prevent piracy, but really just makes it more annoying for legitimate buyers. DRM can come in a variety of forms, either from locking you down to a specific platform like Nintendo's eShop or the PlayStation Store, or more annoying things like making a game always online as a means to constantly authenticate ownership. Most gaming companies really like their DRM. While there are marketplaces like GOG that only house DRM-free content, their library pales in comparison to a platform like Steam, and many game companies have explicitly stated that they would not put their games on platforms like GOG, for totally legitimate reasons that have nothing to do with DRM. And these exceptions really only apply to PC gaming, by the way. There is no way to bypass DRM on home consoles. DRM is why this whole problem of of digital ownership exists. So, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice an inherent contradiction with gaming companies expressing interest in NFTs. To implement NFTs in their most pure form, true decentralized ownership over digital goods requires the absence of DRM. You can have NFTs without DRM or DRM without NFTs, but you can't have both without compromising one or the other. And like I said before, gaming companies really love their DRM. Now, you may be wondering, what's the big deal? Gaming companies are greedy, so they won't implement NFTs in a way that's advantageous to the consumer. We're at the same place we are already. While that may be true, it is a little more insidious than that. We've already seen companies like Ubisoft touting NFTs as something that's good for the consumer because they'll have true ownership over their digital assets. But I'm not sure I buy that. Let's take a stroll through Ubisoft's terms of service for Quartz. We do not warrant that we will operate Ubisoft Quartz for a specific period of time. Yeah, okay, that sucks, but it's not really surprising. Even if we decide to stop operating Ubisoft Quartz, you will continue owning your acquired digits, as they are stored on the Tezos blockchain network, which is decentralized and completely independent from our infrastructure. Okay, that doesn't sound that bad. This means your digits will live on beyond Ubisoft Quartz, and you will still be able to transfer them through marketplaces. Okay, you know what? I'll take the L here. I guess Ubisoft really does want to empower us. However, this also means that the license granted to you will partially cease, as you will no longer be able to use your digits as in-game contents, without any liability to Ubisoft. Okay, alright. Ubisoft is basically saying, hey, you're free to sell this digital asset, even though it doesn't exist. And this is the problem. Companies like Nintendo, EA, and Ubisoft don't want us to own the things we buy. What will happen, what is happening, is that they'll pitch it like this is different from traditional digital ownership, probably charge you more for this privilege, and just sell you the exact same thing they've been selling to you for the last 15 years. So, we're likely to never have true ownership over our digitally purchased gaming goods. But you may be thinking, what about using NFTs to implement real money markets directly into a game's ecosystem? Some games have lifespans that last decades, and it'd be nice for players to get some money back once they're done with the game. That does sound nice and all, and I'm not against the idea of making money off something I'd be doing for fun anyway. But there are a few problems. NFTs will introduce artificial scarcity into the digital gaming marketplace. And why the fuck would we want that? Artificial scarcity. A phrase you might be familiar with if you've taken an introductory economics class or are a Nintendo fan. It's pretty much exactly how it sounds. An item is scarce, meaning the supply is not meeting demand, despite the manufacturer having the means to meet demand. Why do this? Well, there's a whole list of complicated reasons involving manufacturing costs. It's money. They can make a bigger profit by creating and selling less product. That's it. The presence of artificial scarcity inevitably attracts speculators, consumers who, rather than buying the product to actually use it, treat it like an investment. Within the context of the gaming community, we've seen this often has the effect of pushing out those who, actually want to play the Pokemon TCG or use an amiibo because it's cool. Are amiibos cool? I don't know. I've completely lost touch with youth culture. So NFTs, being inherently scarce, because, that's the whole point, will introduce artificial scarcity to a digital gaming marketplace that has largely been able to avoid that kind of practice. That's not a good thing. Every time a developer has introduced digital artificial scarcity to their game, it never turned out good.
An abridged history of digital land scarcity.
In 1997, Origin Systems released the pioneering MMORPG Ultima Online. The game featured a unique housing system in which players could grind for resources, obtain a blueprint, and build their own house. But there was one issue. Houses in Ultima Online were built directly onto the game's finite overworld. Players had to find an open slot of land appropriate for their home, so land became scarce, leading to a housing crisis that the game has never really recovered from in the 25-ish years since its release. Because the costs of maintaining a vacant piece of land were low relative to the cost of selling it, speculators quickly took over Ultima Online's housing and a robust black market developed. It got to the point where if you wanted to own land in one of Ultima Online's more active servers, you had to go to a third-party seller and spend actual money. And Ultima Online is far from the only game that has been hit with a similar crisis. Final Fantasy XIV and Second Life both have bloated housing markets filled with speculators because of artificial digital land scarcity. And in some cases, the digital land markets were so profitable that being a speculative landowner in one of these online games became people's full-time jobs. As someone who played Final Fantasy XIV, I can tell you from experience that I'm pretty sure the title of the game is actually referring to your chances of owning in-game land. I'm sad now, that joke was a little too real. And I have no way of eloquently putting this, but it just sucks. It sucks that there was an aspect of the game that was more or less completely cut off from me because I wasn't lucky enough to get in early or have the money to buy my way in. But in games like FF14 and Ultima Online, housing is optional. You don't need to purchase land to enjoy most of what the game has to offer. So what happens when you introduce artificial scarcity as a main game design element? Basically, you get EVE Online, a massively multiplayer space-based game in which one of its main selling points is its unscripted economic competition. The game is designed in a way to facilitate economic events and political intricacies that mimic the real world, but entirely through player-created events. If that sounds complicated, it is. The game is so intricate that it once had a display in the Museum of Modern Art laying out its player-driven in-game history. One really good example of how digital artificial scarcity inevitably brings in complications that hamper the player experience comes from a blog post by gaming consultant and writer Ramin Shokazad. Shokazad noticed how the game's factories, which were both scarce and central to the game's economy, virtually had no cost to maintain. Thus, speculators could hold on to factories without actually producing anything and just let their value appreciate. Within days of EVE's launch, all the game's factories had been bought by speculators who are now selling them for several $100 a pop. While a fix was eventually implemented with increased rents on the factories to curb speculation, the several months where factories were hoarded by speculators had created a huge class stratification problem. Geez, this game really is like the real world. We have the historical precedent of all these other times real-world markets have entered a game's economy at the expense of the average player. Why should we expect NFTs to be any different? Now, there are certain tactics companies could try to curb NFT speculation. Ubisoft, in their statement regarding the backlash to the announcement that they were going to implement NFTs, acknowledged people's concerns about speculators entering the market. We've made it so it's somewhat hard for people to get into it. You must purchase the game. You must play at least 2 hours. Ubisoft, that's not a barrier to entry. That's a startup cost. It does nothing to address the actual problem. And here's the big difference between NFTs and what happened in games like Ultima Online and EVE. Those developers had to introduce negative incentives to curb speculation. You can't do that with an NFT. You can't charge someone a fee for holding onto an NFT and not selling it. That defeats the whole purpose of true digital ownership. And what if it's not just cosmetic items? Is it really that far out of the realm of possibility that we can get Marvel's The Avengers NFT edition? Oh, I should stop saying these things. It's not good for my stomach. Here lies the contradiction. NFTs will inherently bring in speculation, and the nature of the benefit of true digital ownership will keep companies from implementing any features that would actually curb speculation. And you know what the craziest thing is? This has already started happening. Peter, why are you doing this, man? Just go make Fable 4. So why? Why introduce this NFT aftermarket if it means adding all these complications to your game? Well, gaming NFTs are actually about monetizing the secondary market. Since the earliest days of home console gaming, there has been a constant war between publishers and the pre-owned game market, because publishers don't get a cut off a used game sale. We of course remember when Microsoft revealed how the initial plan for the Xbox One was going to heavily restrict the used game market. In 2009, then president of EA Sports Peter Moore expressed his desire to, quote, monetize the secondhand consumer, and made a seemingly innocuous statement about compulsive game experiences that, in an age of exploitative practices like loot boxes, reads more like a threat than an amusing pondering. Even our beloved Reggie once stated that we don't believe used games are in the best interest of the consumer. Oof, that last one hurt to read. What this led to was an industry increasingly embracing digital media, frequent game sales, adding legacy content, Nintendo offering you more gold coins for digital purchases kind of thing. So if you're like me, seeing companies like Ubisoft embrace the idea of NFTs because they give consumers the ability to sell their digital purchases on a third-party marketplace should give you pause. Why is an industry who, historically, have been vehemently against the idea of a used game market embracing NFTs? Part of what gives an NFT true digital ownership is a thing called a smart contract. Without getting into the nitty-gritty, basically a smart contract can create and enforce certain rules regarding the transaction. One of those rules is the implementation of royalties, so the original creator of the NFT can still get a percentage of the money being made from a resell. In theory, it's a win-win. It solves for the problem of gaming companies not profiting off the secondary market while retaining the secondary market. Yeah, but that's not how it's gonna go down. First off, like we covered before, actual games being sold as NFTs is unlikely to happen. As we've seen in cases like Ubisoft, NFTs will be used as a sort of replacement for some type of microtransactions, but with artificial scarcity. And now let's imagine Ubisoft makes 20 special Rabid NFTs, selling them for say $10 a pop. Now they end up on the reseller market, Gary Vee and Logan Paul make a video about them, and their prices shoot up astronomically. They get bought, resold, until that $10 NFT is suddenly selling for 5 figures. And all the while, Ubisoft is making money with every sale. Companies like Ubisoft are not going to discourage speculation because they want speculation. They stand to make a lot of money from speculation. And once again, we've seen this before. Anyone remember Diablo 3's auction house? Introduced by Blizzard as an attempt to curb third-party trading and scams, Diablo 3 adopted an auction house model similar to World of Warcraft's, except on top of Diablo 3's in-game currency, players could also use real-world money to purchase loot, leading to scams, exploits, and a few people who literally just played the game to make money. So why would Blizzard do all this? Introduce such a system and then make it inherently more complicated to manage by introducing real-world currency? Who knows? I don't know. I guess we'll just have to imagine why. But there was another interesting repercussion that the auction house had on the game, one that I'd argue can serve as a sort of canary in the coal mine for what crypto gaming will end up doing to game design. While Diablo 3's auction house was designed to mimic similar features from games like World of Warcraft, there was a key difference in Diablo 3's gameplay loop that Blizzard hadn't considered. In World of Warcraft, high endgame gear becomes bound on pickup, meaning it's untradeable and unsellable once the item enters the player's inventory. WoW's auction house was mostly devoted to crafting materials that high-level players use to make items that aid them in raids and hard bosses. WoW's auction house served to complement the game's core gameplay loop, not supplement it. However, Diablo 3's auction house allowed for the trading of high-end gear, and along with a mix of other seemingly innocuous game design elements, led to a situation where, well, one of the directors, Jay Wilson, put it pretty succinctly in this GDC clip.
What I want is to kill this guy and have cool stuff drop and get items. But this is actually what happened. It's not good for a game like Diablo. It doesn't feel good to get items from money. You want to get items from killing monsters.
Diablo 3's auction house had essentially incentivized players to not play the game. This eventually led to Blizzard shutting down the auction house altogether in 2013, with Blizzard production director John Haidt going as far to say, the auction house ultimately undermines Diablo's core gameplay. So what does that have to do with NFTs? Play to earn is the antithesis to the point of playing video games. Also, they're possibly pyramid schemes. Allegedly. But they're definitely pyramid schemes. Play to earn is a subgenre that emerged in 2017 with the rise of blockchain gaming. The basic premise is that the time the player spends playing the game is actually a monetary investment, and the characters, items, and rewards that they gain, as NFTs of course, aren't just a time sink. They can actually earn money by having fun. And again, I'm not against the idea of getting paid for something you do for fun. In theory, proponents of this model cite a laundry list of benefits that play to earn can bring to the gaming industry, solving the problem of player retention without needing to add extra paid content like DLC and expansion packs. The hundreds of hours players spent playing the game aren't quote-unquote wasted because they gain assets that can be resold on a market independent of the game, and it democratizes the idea of professional gaming because any player can monetize their hobby, not just players with exceptional skill. And that doesn't sound horrible, but when you see the reality of what the play-to-earn genre is doing and can do to the gaming industry, it's pretty fucking horrible. Those of you even vaguely aware of blockchain gaming have probably heard the name Axie Infinity. This game has everything. NFTs that can be sold on a secondary aftermarket, a huge initial buy-in that inherently curbs the onboarding of new players, a scarce land system like Ultima Online, and it's all bundled under the play-to-earn model. On the surface, Axie Infinity isn't all that different from games like Clash of Clans or today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. I'm not sponsored. I don't know why I just said that. Axie Infinity is functionally a Pokemon clone where you collect little Axies to battle other players. The game is governed by the in-game cryptocurrency known as Smooth Love Potions, or SLP. Your Axies are NFTs that can be sold outside of the game's ecosystem, and a digital real estate bubble is already in the process of forming. But what really gets me is how Sky Mavis, the game's developer, has marketed the game. The first thing you see when you scroll down Axie Infinity's official website isn't a gameplay trailer, it isn't a synopsis about its core gameplay loop, it isn't a blurb about a cool new mechanic that makes the game stand out. The first thing you see on Axie Infinity's official website is how much money the game has made. Axie Infinity's official white page, linked directly on the game's official website right up front, states, while Axie is a fun game, it's also taken on characteristics of a social network and earning platform due to the strong community and opportunity to truly own resources earned within the games. Now, I love this sentence because it inadvertently gives away what I believe are the true intentions behind this game. Pay close attention to the language. While Axie is a fun game, almost like it doesn't matter that the game is fun. Which, by the way, it isn't. While Diablo 3's auction house accidentally created a perverse incentive for players to ignore the actual gameplay, that design philosophy is baked into games like Axie Infinity and Play to Earn in general. It's not an unintended consequence, it's a requirement for the genre. The inevitable end result of that design philosophy undermines the game's gameplay. And if you want to create a game that would be played for years to come, that poses a significant problem. Because when a majority of your player base openly dislikes the game they're playing, they're gonna bounce the second they're not pulling in enough money. Now, on the surface, Axie Infinity seems to be doing just fine. They average 1 million active players daily, grew that number almost exponentially over the course of 2021, and have a player retention rate that more resembles the average workday than any video game. But while all of this may look good on the surface, the formation of a bubble and eventual crash seems all but inevitable unless Sky Mavis implements some drastic changes to Axie's design. At the core of the issue is that the continued growth of Axie's economy requires the constant onboarding of new players. But the vast majority of new players are joining not because they want to play the game, but because they want to make money. Playing the game isn't for fun, it's an investment, and players expect a return. They expect to earn more money than they put in. The majority of the money being made in Axie Infinity is from selling Axies and SLP to new users, which poses a problem when the buy-in costs for Axie Infinity have grown rapidly, which obviously limits the game's reach. What this has led to is the creation of play-to-earn gaming guilds, consisting of VCs and investors who cover the starting cost for people in developing countries like the Philippines, who account for roughly 40% of Axie's active player base. These are called scholarship programs, and guilds like YGG will take a cut off of what their scholar earns in-game while retaining the Axies they loaned out. These guilds will then use the money generated by their scholars to buy things like land and AXS, which are by far the most valuable speculative assets in Axie Infinity. If you think that sounds fucked up and exploitative, it's because it is. Despite these guilds' frequent mantra about being for the players, those at the top of the chain of command don't really look all that different than your average board of directors or shareholders meeting. And they don't even interact with the actual players of the game, opting to contract out managers to do it for them. Yeah, we can watch a million feel-good stories about the opportunity these guilds are offering people, but let's not forget what this whole blockchain crypto gaming movement was supposedly about. It's hard to argue that you're for the gamers when the actual gamers aren't the ones truly being empowered by your game. Now, beyond the fact that, third world exploitation is not good, there is another reason why I'm bringing this up. I've often seen people dismiss the idea of NFTs and play-to-earn being widely adopted because of the immense backlash large swaths of the gaming community has directed toward whatever company attempts to implement them. The vast majority of money being generated by the gaming industry is from high-income countries like China, the US, and Japan, who also make up a large portion of the user base on these social media sites pushing back against NFTs. You'd think that'd be the end of it. Gaming companies have to appeal to players in these countries, and if they don't want NFTs, then that's that. But the success of games like Axie Infinity via gaming guilds like YGG has essentially shifted the core demographic of video game consumers. Instead of players from high-income countries, play-to-earn and NFT gaming has attracted a handful of investors who, in turn, exploit labor in low-income countries. These companies don't need to appeal to the traditional gaming market. Sky Mavis doesn't need to make Axie Infinity sustainable as a game, they need to make it sustainable as a job. But still, there is that question about whether or not they can make Axie Infinity sustainable. Even if the game does go bust, it doesn't really matter in the long term. Think of it this way. Axie Infinity is a game that doesn't exist on any major gaming marketplace, a game that doesn't have any distinguishing or interesting gameplay mechanics, a game that a not insignificant amount of its user base admits is not even fun, and it's now worth more than entire companies like Ubisoft and Take-Two. Do you really think the AAA gaming industry isn't going to stick their hands in that market? NFTs will create video game class stratification. Yeah, I'm being serious.
Let's say that League of Legends chooses to release Black Alistar as an NFT. What if I told you that each one of those NFTs also assigned that owner a vote, and each vote could add one of 3 items to the game? The real power of NFTs is that it can turn players into partial decision makers and owners. Because remember, I told you that you can assign a token or an NFT a governance protocol. One of those governance protocols could be that you have a vote going into the development cycle or the future of a particular project.
Okay. Does that idea scare the shit out of anyone else? The idea of decentralizing control in a video game sounds nice. MatPat, come on. In theory, one of the consistent problems the rapidly growing gaming industry faces is the increasing influence of corporate executives and shareholders who pressure developers to insert microtransactions, push out projects before they're ready, and favor the release of ports, remakes, and sequels over new IP. Trust me, I've complained about this enough on my channel. I love the idea of loosening the grip these type of people have over the industry. But Let's look back at Axie Infinity. Remember those ASX tokens that these guilds are buying with the money they're getting off the backs of players in the third world? ASX is what's called a governance token, a form of cryptocurrency that represents voting power on a blockchain project. So, owners of governance tokens would have some say in policy, purpose, and function of a project on the blockchain. In Axie Infinity's case, Sky Mavis's promises that at some point in the future they will fully decentralize control over the game. Sky Mavis won't be the ones deciding Axie Infinity's design choices, and instead, decision-making will be in the hands of those who own ASX. But are the players the ones who own ASX? The average Axie Infinity player earns around $400 USD a month, roughly $12 a day. As of the recording of this video, AXS costs roughly $60 and was as high as $160 back in November 2021. Assuming that an Axie player is only working 5 days a week, it would take a full week's worth of wages to buy one AXS at the price that it is right now. And for a lot of players in the Philippines, Axie Infinity is their full-time job. I'd imagine a governance token with a vague promise of ownership at some point in the future would likely not be worth an entire week of wages. And even if they could buy it, that's one AXS. To put that in context, this account owns around 100,000 AXS, and that represents only 0.04% of the supply on the market. So yeah, despite making up the majority of the player base, I have a sneaking suspicion that these players in the Philippines aren't the ones buying up millions of dollars worth of AXS. I mean, geez, the top 10 AXS holders control 98% of the market. The ones who own AXS are not the players. They're the investors, speculators, and venture capitalists that operate the game's guilds. The ones who aren't playing the game. So when those governance tokens give you control over the game, do you think those who own AXS are going to advocate for things to make the game better or to make themselves more money? Why should we assume that any other game with a governance token would be any different? Speculators, VCs, and opportunistic influencers will be the ones who gain control because they have the means to do so. The implementation of a governance token would take power out of the executives who don't care about video games and put it into the hands of investors who don't care about video games. As we've seen with games that have attempted to use similar models, the artificial scarcity of NFTs in the play-to-earn genre will come at the cost of pushing out the people who don't have the disposable income to buy in or just want to play video games because they're fun. It's a fundamental rejection of the concept of entertainment for entertainment's sake. The idea that nothing has any inherent value unless it's generating income. Entertainment is intrinsically linked to the human experience. We've been telling stories and making art long before the concept of currency even existed. Crypto investors and the AAA gaming industry are a match made in heaven. One group is in a desperate search for a long-term solution to the whole crypto isn't actually worth anything problem, and the other is an increasingly more powerful and insular collection of companies that want to monetize everything. If the AAA gaming industry finds a way to make NFTs and play-to-earn sustainable, there should be no doubt in your mind that they will become as ubiquitous as DLC and loot boxes. And it's not like blockchain games need to replace traditional titles completely for us to feel the negative repercussions of their adoption. If a publisher is devoting more and more resources to NFT and play-to-earn games, that leads to a dwindling amount of labor and money for the next Elden Ring, which is a thing that has already been happening. I know this has all been pretty doomery. I don't want it to be that way. Look, I really don't care about being right. I'd much rather we all come back and watch this video in 5 years and are able to laugh at my alarmist take and not shudder at something that ended up being prophetic. But Pandora's box has already been opened, and I worry we're heading toward a new, worse era of gaming. But who knows? Maybe NFTs die out, companies lose interest, or Axie Infinity's market completely collapses and no one will ever want to touch the play-to-earn model again. Or maybe they even figure out a way to make all possible parties happy. I do try to be positive, but then I remember that one of the highest grossing video games in 2021 wasn't even fun.